This is just practicing, guys. We'll maybe do a bass cover later on.
Hey baby, what you know good. Now just remember you are good. Boys, when will it end? When will people start getting together again? Things will get better. The newspaper read. What else is new, my friend? Besides what I read. Can't find no work, can't find no job, my friend. Monday's tighter than it's ever been. Hey man, I just don't understand what's going on across this land. What's happening, brother? What's happening?
So we're just doing some practicing there, guys, on a bass line. And obviously this is your gentleman B970 from London. And what we're going to be doing is like a live kind of video, no edits and stuff like that, where we put names and other things in the video, where we start looking at a really classic bass line. Not this bass line, that's just practicing just to warm up. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to look at the bass line Good Times by Chic and Bernard Edwards. And when we do this, we're kind of doing it in an evaluation kind of way, because we start to see some things about this bass line that become peculiar and not really well known within the communities, around the world kind of thing. So what I'm going to do here, guys, is I'm going to play the bass line, which is the standard bass line that most people understand and everybody else out there. So this is like the bass line that like most people like around the world would associate to as being, Bernard Edwards and Chic and Good Times and stuff like that. Like you kind of understand that. But what I'm going to do now is play the lesser unknown original version. For some people actually see this as being the original version of Chic. So now I'm going to play this tune. And so let's have a listen to this tune, the original version. So as you can see there, I played the two bass lines. A few mistakes in the bass line, but it's a kind of live kind of video in that sense, guys, for the guys out there. So you can see that there's these two different bass lines. Now, what it is for the guys out there, DJs and other guys that are not really into music, or they're into music but they don't know much about music theory and notes on pages and stuff, what it is that Good Times is not just speeded up. It means that if you play the bass line on the original version, you have to play the bass line in a completely different area. In other words, it's a completely different bass line. It doesn't mean it's a different bass line because it is, for guys, DJs and guys like that out there. It means that Bernard Edwards may have played this bass line and he only played it one way, and it was either speeded up or slowed down. So we can have a look at both bass lines and look at the pros and cons of both of those bass lines. You know, what's so good about those bass lines, and you know, what's not great about those bass lines. And then, you know, and then work out what we think happens. You know, did Bernard Edwards slow this tune down, or did Bernard Edwards speed this tune up? You know, most people would actually argue that the tune was actually sped up from E minor to F minor. But let's have a look at what happens when we look at both bass lines. When we do that, then we see these kind of fundamental differences when we do this. Now, some of the stuff is quite advanced when we look at this like musical theory, but I'll try and do bits in the video to try and keep it simple, so that instead of people, you know, being sort of like overloaded with all of this music theory, then they can just, you know, kind of basically understand what's going on. So what I'm going to do here, guys, is just put this tune on really quickly, if I can do this, just for the DJs and those kind of guys out there. Right, so I want to play this tune here. So if I'm a bass player and I want to play along with that tune, this note here is the closest denominator of that note of the tune on the bass. If we play the bass and then change the pitch, I've got to physically change the bass line in order for it to match the tune that's just been pitched down. Let's hear it pitched up a little bit, really high. Let's hear it really high. So for DJs and guys out there that don't know that much about music, when you've got vinyls and tunes like Good Times and you change the pitch, it means that the bass player has to play the bass line in a different area. It doesn't mean that he has to play the bass faster or slower. He physically has to change the notes in order to match the remix of the bass line, and that's what you saw here. I didn't play the bass line faster, I played it in two different areas. I played it here, and then in the next mix I played it here, which is in a completely different key. So when we look at these keys, guys, what happens is that for guys like Scott's Bass Lessons and, you know, Ted Bass and Shock Contender and people out there in the bass community, you know, you've got the Mofo crew, you know, you've got Tracy Rich, Morrissey Man 64, Max Proud, and all those kind of guys, Mofo kind of people. What it means is that for the musicians out there, what that means is that when we play bass and we look at it in the kind of jazz, double bass, and then obviously Pinocchio theory of funk theory, when we do that, what happens is that, and this is the lesson for guys like Scott and those guys out there, is that the diatonic harmony changes when you change key on bass. What does that mean? Well, if you play a bass line like this and then change the key, you know, you're just changing the key. It just sounds logical. But when you look at all that Mozart and really classical theory and producers and, you know, and all of these kind of guys, Yannick Gouinster's and those guys, maybe beyond that, because in the videos we go beyond some of Yannick Gouinster's stuff. So when you go into those kind of areas, what happens is that the diatonic measure of the harmony, the natural harmony of the bass, changes when you change key. And now we've got two bass lines in two different keys, and now we can measure the difference in the variation of the diatonic measures of each bass line. So what does that mean? So when we play the bass line here, the second part is here. But now what we can do, just like a scientist, we can put the bass in the water and only play the notes, the minimum amount of notes that you can actually play for that bass line with using the kind of open strings, if you like, because the theory, Scott and those guys know, that's where it actually goes in the chart when you actually see the chart. So when we do that, the bass line now sounds like this. So that is the natural diatonic harmony of this particular key, which is A over the E minor. Which is in the key E minor. When we play the bass line in F, the natural diatonic is in a different position, obviously, and it's in a different register. So we can do that. So this is the natural diatonic harmonic measure of the bass in that key. And so let's say you've got other guys out there and they think about that. What does that mean? Well, when you think about guys like Victor Bailey and academies like Berkeley and Scott's bass lessons, sometimes they teach you about what they call economy, meaning that when you play the bass, you don't have to move around like this. You just stay in one position. Sorry, again. It's all about working economy. So when we play the bass line like this, it's the most economic way of playing that bass line. And when we play it here, in the F minor position, this is also a really economic way of playing the bass. So now we've got these two separate harmonies. You can hear that they're completely different. It's not me copying and pasting this. There's a sequence to each harmony, and now we can measure them. So when we play in E minor, so the note that I'm actually playing is F sharp. F sharp, and the other two notes beside it are natural. When I play the bass line in F minor, so the actual note, not the natural notes, but the note that I'm actually playing is G sharp. So what it means is that when we play the bass line in E minor, and we've got the other bass line in F minor, which are just a semitone apart, the actual diatonic harmony shifts a whole tone. So this is why we're doing it for the musicians like Scott and those guys out there, so that they know that if you play a bass line and change the key, when you look at the diatonic harmony of the bass, it means that each harmony is completely different. You just don't change key. And so when you see composers like Mozart and Bartok and all these other guys that done music, and I said, why do they play in that key? There's a whole myriad of reasons why they play certain bass lines and certain melodies in a certain key, and it's because of their natural diatonic harmony, and you can hear it in this bass line here. So there's a different harmony in each key, and so what happens, like guys like Ted Bass, at the end you see the chart. If you're confused now, when you see the chart, then it all makes sense. So this is just a video leading up to the chart where we look at the bass line. So now, guys, you can actually see that there is this really strong difference in the harmony in each key. and this can be really important for producers and stuff. So when we look at the E minor version, for DJs and other bass players out there, they know that there's really loads of bass lines that are actually in the key of E. Like 60% of funk bass lines could possibly be in the key of E. Very, very popular bass line. But when we think in terms of jazz, and that kind of stuff that people talk about, when we play the bass line in F minor, that actually fits the jazz guys. So this is the actual key where you get that James Brown and funky kind of music. And the reason why is because saxophone players, trumpet players, they really like these kind of keys, B flat, E flat, are really, really big keys for those kind of instruments. It's not just a preference just for bass, it's something that's concurrent in music. So when we play the bass line in F minor, it has loads of different qualities to the bass line compared to when you play it in E minor. The other qualities about it, like when we look at qualities of each bass line, the quality of playing the bass line in E minor means that you can play the bass line a little bit kind of jazzy, and you can put a little bit more feel into the actual riff. So when you play it in E minor, for example, you can play it like this. Obviously that doesn't sound right. Let's say we wrote that on a piece of music and it have the two, notes there. So when you play it in E minor, what you do is you don't do that, but you do play that note, but you try and play that note as though it really was two notes. When you listen to it, and it actually sounds as though it's taking the place of where those, it's taking the place of that. It's got that kind of room to it. So Bernard Edwards is a fantastic bass player, and it all comes out in bass lines like this. It's like he waves a magic wand at the notes, and they go like that. And it doesn't matter whether you get it tight or whether you quantize it, it doesn't sound the same as how Bernard Edwards plays the bass. So when you play the E minor version, you get this really nice quality to the chord changes. But the downside of playing the bass this way is when you play the first three notes and four notes. So when you play the bass line like this, there's something there that actually happens, and it's quite hard to work out what that actually is. There's this wand that's there, but you don't know how he's doing it. You don't know whether he's playing two notes or whether he puts a B in or what the guy's doing. So that's the downside of playing the bass line in E minor. And when it comes to the chorus of the bass line, it's even more dramatic. So what we're going to do now to try and make the video shorter is we're going to try and skip to the verse and chorus of the tune, if we can. So we've got the chorus there now. So when you're playing the chorus, what will happen is that you'll play the bass line like this. So that's a real downside because there's not that much happening to the bass line. So the E minor version, the plus side is that it's really jazzy. You can really get this kind of feel to it through the chord changes. The downside is when you play the chorus and the beginning of the bass line, it really doesn't sound that great. It sounds as though there should be something in there. So when you play the bass line in F minor, the plus side of playing the bass line this way is you get a really free feeling here. Once you start to learn how to play that, it really feels natural. It's easy to play. It doesn't feel mixed up, and you can really get it in the flow, like in the pocket. That's, you know, one of the expressions. It might not be the right bass line, but it really does kind of pocket well to what you're doing. And the other thing about playing the bass line this way, if you're a bass player and your best friend is a drummer, or if you're a drummer and your best friend is a bass player, the best thing about playing the bass line this way in F minor is that you can really get it going with the drummer, because you can put the room by using E onto F to give the drummer that feeling in the bass drum. The downside is when you play there's too much movement, there's too much to do, it's not great, it's not as easy to do as when you play the bass line in E minor. But the two comparisons is that, let's say that you go to like a mixtape place and you want to play Good Times. Well, it's best to use the standard version, the E minor version, the slow version. When I was little, that's right, I was little and I used to go. So that E minor version would be really good for those kind of dark, kind of mixtape, kind of, you know, drum and bass or house, and you want to make it dark, then you use that mix. But let's say you're a DJ and everyone's walking around in the club and they don't feel that great. Well, then you want to play the F minor version, because it's got that get up harmony to the bass line. Get up, come on, get up, subliminally in the bass line. And if you're playing it live, for example, and you really want to impress the audience, then you play it in F minor and you really hit it off with the drum and they go, wow, this band is really powerful, listen to that bass line. You know, you're going all the way down with the drum and they say, yeah, this band's really good. They won't notice that you're playing the bass line in F minor. So if you are a bass player, you've got to try this bass line out in F minor and get into it. And when you get into it, then you start to see the qualities of playing the bass this way. So we've looked at the pros and cons, and we've looked at the diatonic harmony, but then there's something else that kind of happens when we look at the bass these two ways. And some bass players might already notice this, is that when you play the bass line in E minor and get to the second part, what you're doing is you're playing the major six of the note. That's where the strong part of the bass line is in E minor. So that's where it is right there. Part of the bass line. When you play the bass line in F minor, what happens is you're playing this note, which is the flat seventh, because it's a higher harmony and it's more jazzy. Let's compare. This is the harmony that you've got when you play the bass line in F minor. It's here. And in E minor is here. So we can actually see that comparison. So now we've looked at all these different comparisons. What happens? Did they slow the bass line down, or did they speed the bass line up? Now, if they sped the bass line up, there's not that much bass players and DJs have to worry about. The tune was sped up. But if the bass line was slowed down, that means that bass players all the way around the world are actually playing the bass line wrong at that point, because the harmony is a stronger major point on that bass. So the harmony is actually here, not here, or not there. When we look at these different parts, most bass players will play like this. The standard way of playing it is like this. The more advanced way of playing it is like this. You can play it like this. I actually play it like this. So all of those ways of playing the bass line, because of the diatonic harmony, they're not correct. If the bass line was slowed down, it means we all play the bass line wrong. It's C sharp. So what we're going to do now, let's get into that for the guys out there. So how do we understand that? Let's play the bass line in F minor. Why we're playing it like that is because we're playing it like this. So now when we slow down to A, it's more dominant on the major hit. So I know there are bass players that actually do play it like this, but you don't see that many of them. Maybe they do it because they see it as an easy way of playing the bass line, but they might not actually understand that the reason why you play it that way is you would play the bass line that way if the bass line was slowed down. That's like the Blade Runner moment from here. Actually here. So that's the difference. If the tune was slowed down, this is the note you can't hear anymore because it's been slowed down. You can't hear it, but it's there. So that's the note that people can't hear. So what we're going to do is just play the bass line a little bit now, where we actually play that very strong C sharp. Like that. So it's not as though it doesn't fit, it actually does fit to fit the bass line. So there's a really strong indication that the bass line was slowed down. I'm not saying it's true, but there's a really strong indicator that there's a really small possibility that that could have actually happened to this bass line and nobody knew. But, it was actually played in the key of F. They slowed it down, and all the bass players thought it was in the key of E. So when they tried to play it, they could never really get that harmony, that highness, because the pitch, going to Scott, it's not because they're playing it higher. It's because the diatonic, the natural harmony of the key of F is diatonically higher than playing it in the E minor spec, as we've seen. So it might have been something that Bernard Edwards did, deliberately, in a sense, to know that bass players would never be able to play his bass line. They think they know how to play it, but they don't know. And it might have been something that the guy did. I'm not saying it's true, but it's a possibility that it could have been that way. maybe went down the studio and done snippets of both, you know, and then played it live, and so he got the best of both worlds. He could play it really jazzy, and then when he really wanted to dig in, but then he can actually play it, you know, in that way. So there's all of these different ways that we can actually think about that bass line. Now, the last part of this, like I said to the guys on the internet when I said I was going to do the video, is that there's a third possibility, there's a third mystery to the video, to Bernard Edwards, I beg your pardon. So what it is, guys, is that this is an E flat bass. This is E flat. It means I've changed the tuning pegs down here. A lot of bass players will actually know this tuning, and I've done a few tunes in this kind of tuning, in those kind of areas, guys. So you guys know that in those senses. So what it is, when we look at the bass this way, what we can now do is get kind of the best of both worlds. We can play the bass line in E minor, but then we can use the F minor position in order to play the bass line, and then we can actually see what that actually sounds like. Now the reason why I played the tune a long time was actually to get into the chorus. So when we get into the chorus, something happens here that we was actually explaining on the other bass, is that when you play the chorus, you won't be able to hear it that well at this moment. So we're in the chorus part. So when you play that part on a normal E bass, you're playing E all the time. You're going. Alright, you can put a change in there. That's what you're actually doing. When you play it this way, you've got the room now to actually follow the bass drum. Now let's listen to the chorus now. So the other thing about playing the bass line in the F minor position, remember I'm playing the normal one that everybody likes, so I'm playing it on an E flat bass, so I'm playing it in the F minor position. When you play the chorus, it becomes even more compelling that this F minor bass line is contributory to what's going on, because you can't really do this on, you know, Scott and you know, Ted bass mode. If you're on a normal E bass, you're just going to go. But now I've got it. I've got that pitch in the bass line that I can use, and when you've got that pitch, then you can really work it with the drummer. So now we've actually seen the kind of three mysteries of this bass line. Did Bernard Edwards play this bass line in a normal bass on the key of E and just play the bass line in E minor? Did Bernard Edwards actually play the bass line on a normal bass but played it in F minor? And finally, did Bernard Edwards play this on an E flat bass and play it in the F minor position to get some of those extra high harmonic sounds on the bass line, so it always sounds uplifting when you play it that way? What it is that you don't notice that kind of feeling in the bass line on the bass line that a lot of people play. It really does sound like, you know, it follows that E minor sense, but now you see that you can actually play the bass line on an E flat bass, and it sounds exactly the same, even a little bit more uplifting kind of thing. Remember, it's like you know, the chances are that the bass line was actually played in F minor. I'm not saying it's true, but there is a strong possibility, and it's in the chorus that we hear it most. Just emphasizing. It's like Blade Runner. You can't play like that on this bass. You can, but it becomes awkward and it doesn't have that same natural feel. So again, for the last time, guys, for the guys out there, how did Bernard Edwards play this bass line? Did he play it on a bass like this, in a normal key of E minor? Did he play it on this, in a normal key of F minor? Or did he fool everybody and play the bass line on an E flat bass in the F minor position in the studio? Nobody knew that. And so when people heard the bass line, they thought it was in E minor. Every time they tried to play it, it wasn't quite the same. They could never get that Bernard Edwards feeling in the bass line. And, you know, and he kept it kind of to himself. We don't know. And that's why I'm doing the video, guys, because if you're advanced bass players and DJs now know the story, but if you're a bass player, you might go into the idea of, you know, working out what actually way, you know, how do you like to play good times? Now you know there's two ways of playing good times. You've got the jazz way, no, this is the wrong one, the jazz way, and then you've got the upbeat, get on the dance floor and start really shaking way, and you can do that on both basses. Three different ways of playing good times. So, you know, so that's really interesting for the first video. And what we found out, the way that we solved it or looked into it, was the whole idea about how harmony changes every time you change key on bass. It's a completely different harmony. It's not just going up and down the fretboard. And what happens in the Pinocchio Theory of Funk is that when you see the chord chart, the 12 key chord chart, then all of this, what I'm talking about, makes sense. So thanks for watching the videos, and again, guys, you don't have to subscribe, you don't have to click any buttons below. I'm not trying to sell you anything or trying to get something going. It's just a hobby, and it's something that I want you to do on the internet, guys. So thanks, and I'll see you soon.